There's 9 guests now, 10 guests.
Someone's got their hand up.
They see us. We're live.
See,
Oh,
Storm Bomb's already chatting. Yeah, I don't think the Jessica, Kathy, for your benefit, I don't think the suppress chat function is actually working. So we Sarah and I tested it today, and as a guest, I was still able to chat. I mean, I don't think they can turn their microphones on and stuff.
I think maybe they can hear you because the chat, Mike had made a comment about the causeway.
yes, I noticed that too.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay. This is a learning process. I'm learning how this is all
We all are.
Okay.
Glad I didn't say anything too stupid.
All right, I'm going to slideshow that. You all can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
It is the slideshow. Okay. Can you see the chat window and all of that? Or just the PowerPoint?
Just the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And then I have cameras on the side as well, but not the chat feature.
Okay. Okay, we've got 17 participants. And lost my clock. Just a moment. Okay, it's 6:01, so let's get started. Looks like the chat function is working and folks are using that, which is fine. We will have a Q&A and a discussion period towards the end of the PowerPoint presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining us. Welcome. We are here tonight talking about the SacRT Short Range Transit Plan. Thank you for joining us. This is our first virtual event for the Short Range Transit Plan. Tonight, we're going to be providing you all with information and updates on the Short Range Transit Plan, which we are calling SacRT on the Move. I am Sarah Poe, SacRT Planner, and one of your panelists for this evening. I am joined by 3 other SacRT staff members here tonight, and I will let you all introduce yourselves.
Me, I'll go first. Good evening, everyone. My name is James Drake. I also work in the planning department. I'm principal planner with Sacramento Regional Transit. And Sarah, maybe I missed it, but just to make sure everyone knows, we are this session is being recorded, I believe.
Yes, sorry about that. We are recording this and it will be on the website. We will post it on the website after the meeting. Thanks for
My name is,
me, James.
oops, I'm sorry. My name is Kathy Sajan. I'm the Paratransit Operations Manager.
And good evening. My name is Jessica Gonzalez. I am the Director of Marketing, Communications, and Public Information for SacRT.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, so let's get started. And for everyone, I just wanted to give everyone a just a background on what a short-range transit plan is. A short-range transit plan, or an SRTP, is a document that plans out transit services and operations for a 5 to 10 year period. And all transit agencies that received direct federal funds are required to have a short-range transit plan. So SacRT's short-range transit plan update is, we are calling it SacRT on the Move. And the SRTP document, SacRT on the Move, that document will address services and operations for the fiscal year 2022 to 2026 period. And that document's going to evaluate our fleet needs, our capital costs and revenues, our operating costs and revenues, future projects, and new services. So our SRTP document, we decided to do this plan as a 5-year plan instead of a 10-year plan. Our last SRTP document was a 10-year plan, and we chose to do a 5-year plan instead of a 10-year plan because a 10-year plan we found that was just a little bit too long. 10-year period seems to be a little bit too long because one small change can kind of make a little bit, can alter the plan quite a bit. So a 5-year planning period is a little bit more practical for short range purposes. And plans that are beyond 5 to 7 years are typically long range transit plans. So that's why we chose to do a 5-year plan instead of a 10-year plan this time around. Several reasons why we're doing a short range transit plan. It is a requirement of the Federal Transit Administration and SACOG. SacRT has an MOU with SACOG as they are the regional transportation planning agency. We're required to provide them with a current SRTP as agreed. We have a current MOU with SACOG. Second, our previous SRTP was for, as I mentioned, a 10-year planning period, and that is coming near its expiration. That was done in FY 2012. So it's coming up, expiring in 2022. So also, there have been major changes in the region that have impacted transit, including the SacRT Forward project, the COVID pandemic, and continued growth and development in the SacRT service area. So those are some of the reasons why it's time to do an update to the SRTP. The SacRT Forward project is an influential piece to our SRTP update. A lot of the goals and the strategies of the SacRT Forward project are going to carry over to the work that we're going to do as a part of the SRTP. And James Drake is going to share some of the data and the results of the 2019 project.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, I'd like to thank everyone, all of the guests for coming out tonight. It's good to see a good turnout. It's good to see some familiar names and plenty of new names. I'm not going to dwell too much on the system background here, but Sarah, if you want to jump to the next slide. A little bit, like as Sarah mentioned, our SacRT Forward project back in 2019, we did like a complete redesign of the SacRT bus network, and it was a project that was about 2 years in the making. Late 2019 is when it rolled out and took effect. And as it turned out, you know, about 6 months later, our whole world was turned upside down by the COVID pandemic. But in a lot of ways, the short range transit plan update, it's kind of an epilogue to the SacRT Forward project, right? We did a complete redesign of the bus network. Here we are, you know, a couple years later, and including with the results of the pandemic. How did it go? What worked well? What didn't work so well? So I'm going to do a little rundown on what changed in that SacRT Forward project. It's important, I think, to kind of look back at where we were and what we did and why, and what of that worked, what didn't work maybe, and how much of it is still really relevant in kind of the post-pandemic world. So this chart kind of shows, this is kind of a statistical profile of our system before SacRT Forward. Back in the day, we had 40 regular routes, and this chart kind of shows the ridership per hour on those routes. It kind of shows how productive and efficient those routes were. And we'll come back to that in a little bit for kind of a before and after comparison. But let's go ahead and jump to the next one, Sarah.
What's happening here?
I think the next slide talks a little about kind of just the broad themes of SacRT Forward.
Is this the one you want?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
In kind of a strategic sense, a lot of what we were trying to do was kind of consolidate and simplify the network. It really hadn't been looked at in a comprehensive way in many, many years. We wanted to get rid of redundancy where it was and focus on major corridors. And one of the results of it was we compressed down from 40 routes to just 27, 28 routes. I kind of forget because we added an airport route right after that. But let's jump to the next one too, Sarah. Yeah, numerically, we went down to 27 routes. All of those routes had 7 days of service. That wasn't a feature before. One of the things when we first set out was we had a pretty big focus on improving frequency of the system. We wanted to get more 15-minute headway routes. But when we started looking at things, one of the things we noticed was that the old system, the weekend network was almost unusable because a lot of our routes didn't even run on weekends. And the ones that did run tended to have really, really long headways. Most of the system was hourly headways on weekends. So one of our goals that kind of emerged over the 2 years of the project was that was really kind of the first step, was to beef up that weekend network. And that's a lot of what we did. Numerically speaking, we increased our overall service levels 3.8%. So that's really not a huge increase, although, you know, at those numbers, it does end up adding up quite a bit dollar-wise. But the project essentially, it was not like a major expansion project like you would do after like a huge sales tax increase or something. This was basically take the system you have and kind of reorder it a little, try to make it a little more orderly and efficient, I guess. Next slide. So how did we expect ridership to perform? Some of this is a little technical, but basically kind of industry standard is if you increase service 10%, your ridership is going to typically go up about 3%. That's something you can budget on. We were hoping to do better than that, but budgeted about that much. So a 3.8% increase in service. We were expecting ridership system-wide to go up about 1%. Next slide. How did we actually do? So we, in spite of the pandemic launching in like March of 2020, we did have a little window of right around the month of February 2020 where we could really get a good look at how the new network worked. We launched in September 2019. February 2020 was the 6-month mark, and that's typically about how long it takes for ridership to ramp up for major changes. And it was, of course, before the pandemic. And on a kind of a raw numerical basis, we were pretty pleased to see that ridership was up like 20% on a year-over-year basis, February 2020 to February 2019. But to be fair about it statistically, we made some adjustments to that to properly attribute to the SacRT Forward project, because 1 month after we did the new network in September is when we also launched our Ride Free RT program, which allowed all students to ride for free. And that had a huge impact on ridership. 12.5% of that 19.5% we determined was due to the free ride program. So that was a huge success, great program for us, but we wanted to kind of separate those results out to analyze just SacRT Forward. Likewise, we looked at similar agencies that had made no changes. And those agencies in that month, year over year, were up 3%. And there can be a lot of year over year differences in ridership just based on weather, number of days, number of weekdays in the month, that kind of thing. So we deducted that out, and that still left a gain of 3.8% on the net in February. So that's the gain we said, you know, as best as we can tell with kind of a limited window of analysis. That's what we think the results of SacRT Forward were. You can jump into the next one, Sarah. And, you know, big picture, these aren't really huge numbers. This isn't like ridership jumped 20% or anything like that. But this was a project, of course, where we were kind of reorganizing the system, starting from scratch. So, you know, one of the basic goals was, you know, don't lose ridership. Don't make it go in the wrong direction, right? And what we ended up doing, like I said, we raised service levels 3.8%, and ridership also went up 3.8%. And we were expecting, I mean, we budgeted only a 1.5% jump. So we beat our expectations. We set, I think, relatively cautious and conservative goals for the project, but we were pleased to see that we had beat those results pretty well. And when you look at it on kind of a day-by-day basis, you can see that revenue hours, that's how we measure our level of service. That's essentially vehicle hours out there on the street. You can see that we made major increases, 41 and 75% to our weekend level of service. And you can see that the ridership likewise responded. And we actually beat kind of that industry standard where you usually get that 30% return on investment. We actually did quite a bit better than that on Saturdays and Sundays, which tells us that there really was a pretty pent-up demand for weekend service, that this was a need. It was a good use of those resources. And then what we did on weekdays, Monday through Friday, it's not that we did more with less, but we kind of did the same with less. We actually reduced service levels 3.7% on weekdays, and ridership was essentially unchanged, up 0.3%, kind of within margin of error. So I think maybe skip the next two slides. I think this is maybe overkill. I'd like to keep it moving, and then we can get to Q&A. Okay. This is just kind of a before and after of this. Last slide shows kind of the transition in the system from those 40 routes that lacked much weekend service to kind of a more uniform system where on Saturdays and Sundays, all but one of our routes runs 7 days a week. And the fact that these charts are more blue, this indicates there's a lot more 30 and 45-minute headways instead of those green hourly headways. But turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks, James. Okay, so I just want to take the next few slides and share with you guys some few of the influences, some of the other things that we want to consider when we are looking at our short-range transit plan. Some of the other considerations, the COVID-19 pandemic was also very influential piece. That's going to be an influential piece to the SRTP update, since we must consider all of the recent trends that have occurred as a result. Now, this graph here illustrates the pre and post pandemic weekday ridership on SacRT's bus and light rail system. And you can see here the drop in ridership in March of 2020, when the pandemic required stay-at-home orders for commuters and distance learning for students. And this also continues to kind of illustrate the COVID-19 pandemic trends here. The table shows the percent change in ridership on routes from October 2019 pre-COVID compared to October 2021. Students have returned to campuses and student ridership has increased. However, the commuter routes, the 100 series routes that's indicated in the red circle there, those routes are still experiencing low ridership, and many people are still continuing to work from home. This slide here, the influence on the short-range transit plan, the regional growth and development, the growth and development that occurs in the region over the next 5 to 10 years will have some influence on SacRT's future service plans. SacRT has been in coordination with the city and the county on some of the following projects for potential transit service options. Some of the projects include the Metro Air Park in Greenbrier, the Delta Shores area. There's several projects going on in the Delta Shores area that we've been coordinating with the city on. Also Innovation Park, which is the old arena site. We've been working with the city on several projects in that area. And also the Upper West Side and Jackson Corridor. So development projects that extend beyond SacRT's, the SRTP's 5-year plan period will be included in the long-range transit plan. We want to provide transit services to new growth areas that will generate high ridership demand. So you'll see some of those projects mentioned in the short-range transit plan. This slide, I believe, James, did you want to talk about the future services?
Yeah,
Objectives for
probably.
future service plan.
Yeah, I think probably one of the more interesting parts, the part people are always super interested in is what we're planning for the next 5 years. So we'll go through some of the scenarios we're looking at right now. The process and the timeline includes, we're still sort of at the early stages of the project. So early next year, we'll be putting together and putting out our draft plan, which will be more comprehensive. But at this stage, we really want to start soliciting input, not just what you would like to see, what improvements are needed. We get that all the time, and we want to get that as part of this project. But what this project does that we don't do every day is really itemize all of those comprehensively and try to establish priorities, get that public feedback, and do a little bit of high-level planning work. Put an approximate cost to these things, put a price tag on them so we can evaluate them, make some estimates as to ridership impact, and put together timelines. Some of them are based on when certain capital improvements will come through, or land development projects, things like that. So tonight I have, a few kind of previews, so to speak, or some of the key things that we know we'll be looking at or that we've already begun looking at. By no means is this a comprehensive list of everything that will be in the short-range transit plan. And, I'd also note that the SRTP itself is not the last step in making these things happen. It will go to our board, but it's not the same as literally approving a service change for implementation. This kind of tees these things up for that next step. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump, Sarah, to the next slide. One of the first things, one of the more firm knowns, relates to improvements to the gold line over the next 5 years. Just earlier this year, we finished our preparation of what we called our network integration plan. This was a study we did as part of our grant funding for the replacement of light rail vehicles on the Gold Line. And as some of you may know, our new Gold Line vehicles are going to be low floor vehicles. So we're doing a complete transition of first the Gold Line and ultimately the entire system to a low floor system, which will be much more accessible. As part of the more concrete step of getting funding for new light rail vehicles on the Gold Line, we received some funding to do a little more planning work on the timing of actual step-by-step changes and improvements to that line. And that study itself, again, kind of like the SRTP, it's not completely binding, but it does do a lot of the pre-implementation groundwork. So the first thing that will happen, according to the plan, is that in September 2023, that's when we'll have received our first batch of new low floor vehicles. We plan to introduce 15-minute peak headways out to Folsom. Right now, it's just every 30-minute service out to Folsom. We will have new cars, and we'll also have completed a section of double tracking that's needed to run 15-minute service out to Folsom. Initially, we'll do that just during peak hours, basically just during the rush hour when we have the highest ridership. And following shortly after that, in early 2024, we'll actually add 3 additional trips. Right now, we'll go from 15-minute headways to having 3 additional trips slotted in between those regular trains to help supplement the demand we have during peak hours. In 2025, the plan is to bump that 15-minute headways up to Allday to Folsom. And then in 2026 and 2027, the plan is to actually combine the gold line and the green line into one line. This will coincide with improvements downtown, a slight relocation of the Sac Valley Station, and a completion of track connecting Sac Valley Station to the green line on 7th Street. Once that works in place, we'll have the ability to combine those into 2 lines, which will be a little more operationally efficient and give customers a few more options without a transfer. Next slide. The next thing we've been looking at in some of our early work is a comprehensive look at our span of service. That's the term we use to basically say the begin and end times, when we start service and end service each day. Kind of, again, coming on the heels of the new network, SacRT Forward. This is a little bit of a follow-up project to go through and look at each of our routes and where they meet at their terminals and major connection points, and to look for any mismatches. For instance, one of our major routes may run till 11 o'clock at night. Some of the connecting routes may end a lot earlier, 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, even 8 p.m. And not every route can necessarily support super late night service. But what we've done is we've gone through and we've tried to look for any real major mismatches and imbalances, so that as a customer, you have a little bit more of a cohesive system if you're leaving downtown and riding out, taking light rail out and trying to get a connecting bus, that most of the buses end around the same time. And that way the buses, can not only support the light rail system, but support one another. And next slide, Sarah. The overall price tag is pretty high on this. So it's not clear that we'll do all of this, but we've identified just about $1.5 million a year worth of what we would call needs, or at least desirable improvements, to kind of unify those start and end times, both at the end of the day and early in the morning, weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And the other thing we've looked at, it's easy to overlook, but also the time when we shift headways. A lot of routes will have 30-minute headways during the day, and they'll drop down to 60-minute headways in the late evening. We looked at that too, as to when is that cut off from kind of daytime headways to late night headways. Next slide. So one other big area we've looked at is frequency improvements. Like I said, when we started the SacRT Forward project, kind of what we thought the emphasis was going to be on adding more 15-minute frequency cores. We thought that would give us a lot of bang for our buck. The price tag for a lot of that ends up being pretty high, and we ultimately felt that the weekend network was in greater need of kind of basic improvement. But as we look to the next 5 years, you can jump to the next slide. We have wanted to price out and look into frequency improvements. First and foremost, on Route 30, this is a route where we actually used to have all-day 15-minute headways. And in SacRT Forward, we rolled back the 15-minute headways during the midday period. And that was somewhat mitigated by the fact that we added service from another route, Route 38, on part of that corridor. But in looking at our ridership, looking at our customer feedback, This one has been really high on the list, both from customers, and the ridership data supports it, that adding back that all day 15-minute headways on Route 30 would just be a really nice fit and a pretty high priority thing for us to do. Route 81 and Route 87 are two other routes we've looked at that are pretty high on the list. They have a lot of connecting routes. They're kind of right in that first ring of our system, and 15-minute headways we think could provide a lot of benefit. Next slide. I think that's I think this is the point where I turn it back to you, Sarah.
Yeah. Okay, so project timeline. Sorry, I've got some windows open here. I can't really see the entire slide. I've got chat windows open. Okay, so right now we are in the community involvement period of the SRTP project. We've kicked it off with these virtual open houses, tonight being the first one. Our second event will be next Wednesday. We will continue to do some community involvement events and some outreach for the next, probably the rest of the calendar year, and just collect some public comments and do those kinds of events and things like that. We will draft an SRTP document and prepare that for public review. We will go to the board and open a public comment period and have a hearing, and that will be most likely in January. I say winter of 2022, but that's targeted for January of 2022. And we're targeting to have the SRTP document going to the board for adoption in spring of 2022. So that is the timeline that we're looking at. Right now, we have a bit to do some Q&A, and what I think we can do is use what I had planned to do was to use this Q&A function here. Hopefully that's okay for everybody and it's accessible for all of you guys that are joining us tonight. If it's not, maybe we can try and it looks like the chat is working for a lot of you folks, and we can certainly continue to do that. I don't know how speedy we can be with the responses, but I'd like to try and use the Q&A function here. Let's see. So what I'd like to do is just go through and read what we've got so far and just discuss those questions and answers and have those kinds of open discussion on the online right now.
Yeah, there's a question
Trying to see if I can
about weekend service in Elk Grove. That is actually one of the things we have been looking at. We didn't include it in the presentation tonight, but Elk Grove has 3 routes that run on Saturdays and none that run on Sundays. That's out of the norm for us at SacRT. You know, with SacRT Forward, we set out to have, our routes all run 7 days a week. Now, the Elk Grove transit service, just earlier this year, it was owned and managed by the city of Elk Grove. It only recently, on July 1st, transitioned over to SacRT ownership. And the terms and conditions of that transfer are all part of, a very multifaceted negotiation. And, the dollars and cents of it all were a very meaningful and operative part. So adding weekend service, kind of normalizing Elk Grove to what I guess I call like kind of SacRT standards, definitely would have a price tag associated with it. And that wasn't written out as one of the things we'd be doing as part of that annexation. So I think it's something that the district will have to kind of evaluate and balance. It's very important to, our board and the riders we serve, that new service we add gets rolled out in kind of a fair fashion throughout the district. Everybody always has gaps and needs. So I guess I would say that weekend service in Elk Grove is a need that we've identified. We've set out to quantify the cost of it, the potential ridership, and it's something that we'll present and I think be looking at as part of this project.
James,
And-
is this one, this is Betty Henderson Sparks's question about weekend bus service in Elk Grove?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just select, you've answered this live, right? Okay.
Yeah.
We're using the Q&A function that you've answered this one live. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, I would suggest folks, it is a little easier, I think, if questions come in through the Q&A. We can try to go through the chat too, but it is a little more orderly if they come in through the Q&A.
Okay, so I'm going to just do this in order that we received them in. So I'll read the next one that we received. Jeff Tardigia requested a copy of the presentation. Sure, Jeff, we'll get that out to you. Next question from Jeff. What besides railroad project and train platform is major impact on this plan?
Yeah, where do we begin? Yeah, I think you categorized it reasonably well at the beginning, Sarah. I mean, there are land development changes. We've looked at major, greenfield developments going on in the Northwest County and part of the city.
Yeah.
Out in the Southeast County. There
Well,
are capital improvements like the Gold Line.
yeah,
there are
we're looking
things like
at
the annexation of Elk Grove.
yeah, we're looking at FY 22 to 26. And when we have the draft plan and when we take that and we have that out for review in January, there will be a lot more detailed language in there that will give a lot more information about those kinds of projects, Jeff. But it will have some more information about those kinds of things, those kinds of projects, and like on that one slide, and I will share the presentation with you, but on that one slide with the examples of the projects that we have that we're working in coordination with the Delta Shores projects and Innovation Park projects, things of that nature. If you just think about the span of the 5 years, and there's just a number of things, happening. So there's a great deal of projects that are going to be included probably in the next 5 years. So we'll share that information. We'll share the presentation with you. And, if there's some specific things that we can answer, that we'll definitely can get into more detail. But yeah, it's gonna be coming in January that we can really get into the, some more weeds for you. So the next question, let's see, Betty, we answered your question about weekend bus service for Elk Grove. Eric Matlock has a question about SacRT Go is always late. The SacRT Go is always late. I don't know if that's really a question.
That's probably not really the scope of
the
SRTP.
Barnbaum, I asked question. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to be dismissive of the question, and I'm pleased that Kathy, our SacRT Go manager, is here listening in. I'm not going to put Kathy on the spot to respond. The SRTP is really more about kind of planning, budget type, major agency decisions. That certainly RT has had some difficulties over this late summer and fall with the labor shortage that everyone's experiencing, that I think is affecting some of our service quality. But we should probably keep moving on to more directly SRTP related questions.
Okay, we have an anonymous attendee asked a question, what about weekend service for the Folsom bus line?
Yeah, I glad that was asked. I meant to add that in response to Betty's question about Elk Grove. Before we moved on to other questions, Folsom is really kind of in the same boat as Elk Grove in that there basically is just weekday service on their one route. And so everything I said about Elk Grove applies the same to Folsom. Folsom likewise ran an independent system until just a couple years ago, when it became an official part of the SacRT system. The terms of that were basically leave it as is for a little while. Neither side wanted to alter things. But now that we're going into this SRTP, this is exactly the time to look at that and say, you know, what would it cost? What are the pros, cons? What are the costs and benefits of bringing the Folsom service up to that same standard of 7-day-a-week service?
Let's see. Jeff Tardigia is asking, how about 30 and 62 switching service? It's an abbreviated service, 62 to Amtrak and 30 downtown, like 62 around I and J Street. Consider 38 returning to P and Q Street for 19th.
Well, those are good suggestions. I think my response would be, we actually are and have been looking at the 30, 38, 62, and the 51 as part of the network integration plan that I mentioned earlier. That plan, the focus of it was really primarily on the light rail, but the overall scope for that plan, as part of a condition of our funding for new light rail vehicles, the real thrust of it was to make sure our system is, you know, cohesively integrated with the state rail plan. So anything touching the state rail system was part of that plan. So one of the things we did as part of that project was look not only at our downtown light rail, but also at our downtown buses. And some of the big things that are going on there, I mentioned realignment of the downtown Sac Valley station and new track, but we also have a new station being planned and developed by the city of Sacramento. We also have major development going on in the Sacramento rail yards. There'll be a Kaiser Hospital out there. There'll be a Republic FC soccer stadium. So we look not only at the rail side, but the bus side. And our recommendations with respect to that were actually that long run, we actually want to run at least a couple of our bus routes, probably the 30 and the 38, up into the rail yards so that they have direct service to the Kaiser Hospital. We were looking for a while at kind of doing all 4 of those routes that I mentioned up there. We kind of thought that might be a little overkill, both in terms of cost and curb space. So I suspect that the 62 and 51 will remain with just a downtown terminal, with the city building a new downtown Sacramento Valley station. We may be having the Route 51 use that station as its terminal. The intent of the new Amtrak station, the new Sacramento Valley station, is primarily to build space for intercity buses, for Amtrak buses and other major intercity services that have larger buses, longer layovers. But the current terminal for our Route 51 really is not a totally ideal location. It just has kind of an on-street terminal on 8th Street. It works okay in some respects, but in many respects, if there's room for us in the new Sac Valley station, we think that would actually be a better location for us.
Okay. This question is from an anonymous attendee. So are the current routes going to remain the same? So No. Well, it's kind of undetermined. We don't really have anything finalized yet with what we're gonna do. We're still making those kinds of determinations and, right? You know, we're in the process of making those recommendations, determinations on what we're gonna do for service plans. We're in the process of all of that right now, making those decisions on what we're going to do with those routes. You've proposed, James, in some of your slides, some of the ideas, some of the concepts. So the question, are routes going to remain the same? I mean, you know, some of our routes will, I guess, stay the same, but you know, some of them will change. I don't really know how to answer that. It's not really a clear question.
I think it might help just to kind of recap the process here a little bit. You know, like Sarah said in the introduction, it's a plan of 5 years. So there's a certain level of detail we do for a plan of this nature. We're doing a lot of kind of basically first cut, kind of back of the envelope work. We're looking at what the price tag would be for a lot of different scenarios. We're making rough approximations of what the ridership impact would be. We're using these as a way to facilitate a discussion with our board, with the public, and to try to establish a bit of a priority. But it's not, this project in itself won't conclude with, okay, route A, B, and C are changing. That's kind of the next step after this. We typically make service changes with kind of a 6-month horizon. You know, we're looking right now at changes that we may do next year. That's kind of a parallel process with the SRTP. The SRTP just lets us get a little more organized and lay out more orderly plan for a little bit longer timeline of 5 years.
Okay, next question is from Jeffrey Tartagia. What is rationale from 4 buses to 2 buses to New Kaiser Hospital, north, east, south?
I might ask Jeffrey to rephrase that one. I don't know if I'm totally following that. And we do have a lot of questions, so
Okay,
let's maybe jump to the next one. And
next one
Jeffrey,
is
maybe if you can clarify.
Mike Barnbaum. These, okay. Is existing Route 82 a candidate for 15-minute service or not for the scope of this draft plan? Would SacRT be able to initiate more bus service improvements than originally planned, due in large part to recently passed federal legislation like the CARES Act of March 2020 to the IIJA Act from last Friday?
I can field
So
that.
first part, is existing Route 82 a candidate for 15-minute service?
I would say a candidate, yes. Route 82, for those of you who don't know it, it runs from Sac State, essentially, or University 65th Light Rail Station to American River College. And it has basically all the criteria we'd look for a route that's a candidate to become a 15-minute headway route. It basically runs at 30-minute headways 7 days a week now. It's almost always a very well-used route. The question would probably just be how high it ranks compared to other similar routes. There are several other routes with similar kind of qualifications. If there's any real deficiencies to Route 82, it's probably that it's maybe not kind of a 12-month strong route. It tends to have a lot stronger ridership, a lot higher demand during the school year because it serves 2 colleges. But yeah, the simple answer is yes. I think it's a very high ranking candidate for service improvements, Mike. On the question about the CARES Act, I mean, that's probably not necessarily out of scope for the SRTP, but probably for tonight's conversation. I mean, the SRTP is more focused really on the expenditure side than on the revenue side. Our objective is to kind of like I said, get price tags for a lot of these things and help evaluate what might be a priority for spending. But it really is kind of that next step of doing a literal service change. And that's why we end up going into more detail when we do, an actual service changes. That's when we have to get a little more refined on those cost estimates and talk with our finance, grants, and revenue people about what we'll really be able to afford in the next fiscal year budget, what we'll be able to sustain.
Okay. Charles Johnson asks, what is the effect of disabled persons on your 15-minute headways?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question. I mean, one thing definitely springs to mind though, in when I talk to our dispatchers, when I read through our dispatch logs, pass-ups of wheelchairs is an everyday issue. We probably have it, frankly, on Route 51 more than any other single route. And that actually is a route that already has frequent headways. So that's a route where we could consider improving headways even more. We do have times of the day where we run 12-minute headways on Route 51. And if we see a real pattern of wheelchair pass-ups during certain times of the day, that may very well be a candidate for bumping up those headways even more. We've had in the past issues on weekends too. The wheelchair space, it can fill up pretty quickly on weekends when the headways tend to be even longer. So I think that's a really good comment. That's something I probably should be looking at more. And I think we should incorporate that into our efforts over the next month or two, Sarah. I do know that I'm totally responding to Charles' question. So if you want to clarify with a follow-up question, perfectly welcome.
Okay. I'm just going to read this as it's written, and I don't really quite know. This is from Jeffrey Tardigia. Respond to Go Transit when will connect to bus stop, bus route, bring door-to-door service to 1 hour. So maybe, Jeffrey, I don't really know what it's asking, if you can resend it. I'm not sure what the question is. Respond to Go Transit when will connect to bus stop, bus route, bring door-to-door service to 1 hour. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not totally following that one
okay,
either.
well, the next question is from Mike Barnbaum. With regards to span of service and network simplicity, could the existing 3-tier schedule, weekday, Saturday, Sunday, holiday, be considered to go to a 2-tier schedule, weekday, weekend, holiday instead? That would be more understandable to riders. So he's asking if we could move from a 3-tier schedule to a 2-tier schedule.
Yeah, and you see that a lot on intercity rail, and you see that some of our routes have the same schedule on Sundays and holidays as they do on Saturdays. To be honest, when we were doing the SacRT Forward new network, our first drafts of that had even higher levels of service on Sundays and holidays, to the point that they were almost identical in service to Saturday. And without a doubt, that would have some benefits in terms of kind of legibility or understandability for riders. We did ultimately back away from that level of investment. When we kind of ran the numbers, we looked at what we thought ridership would be. That was such a heavy investment in Sundays and holidays. And as much as we did think that there was a lot of pent-up demand for weekend service, I think that was borne out. It is also a fact that there is nevertheless lower total demand on weekends than on weekdays. Without a doubt, there are just more people out and about on weekdays. There's more regular trips. There's more transit possible trips on weekdays. So when we modeled things out, what we saw from that level of investment in Sundays and holidays was it just wouldn't be that big a bang on the buck. I mean, like I said at the beginning, one of the goals of SacRT Forward, doing a brand new network, is we didn't want to lose riders. We didn't want to change things around and have the results be worse. And we did think that at a certain level, reallocating too much from weekdays to Sundays would end up being counterproductive from a ridership standpoint. So I suspect we're going to want to stay more or less where we are with respect to kind of the proportions of service. I think it would still be very desirable to get away from hourly service on Sundays and holidays. That's except for your really long distance routes, your intercity routes. 60-minute headways is just pretty difficult to use. That it's kind of an inevitability, kind of end of the day, end of the service day. The ridership drops off quite a bit, but during the midday, I think we'd like to be above that. It's just kind of a matter of priority, what that price tag is and how it compares to other needs, because there certainly are gaps in needs throughout our entire service area.
Okay, next question.
And we got
have
about 5 minutes left too, so I think we're getting
We
close
have
to the end of the question.
about 5 minutes left, and I think we have maybe just a few questions. So I think we're good on time. Will Greyhound buses stay at Richards Boulevard? This is from Rick Hodgkins. Will Greyhound buses stay at Richards Boulevard?
I don't know of any plans by Greyhound to move, nor do I think the city has any intent or desire to relocate Greyhound.
Okay. Mike Barnbaum's question, with regards to Route 51 as it is today, I have observed that operators are pulling buses into the existing berths at Sacramento Valley Station when it is after 5 p.m. on weekdays and all day on weekends, so that there is easy access to restroom and restaurant facilities. A formal route change on Route 51 ought to be taken into consideration sooner rather than later, taking this observation into consideration.
Good comment, Mike. Yeah, I think that conforms with a lot of what we were thinking with potentially realigning that to the new Sac Valley Station.
Okay, anonymous attendee is asking, is SmartRide going to continue to grow with serving more areas and or neighborhoods?
SmartRide is a bit of an unknown because it is, strictly speaking, a pilot program. The funds for operations of SmartRide they come from a special revenue fund, part of the Measure A local sales tax. And they were originally limited to a 3-year trial. Just about a year ago, we got a 2-year extension to the program. So we are funded through June 30th of 2023, but we do not at this point have secured funding for that. There's always been a hope that there would be a local sales tax push to increase local sales tax. That would be one really great way to continue that service in perpetuity. Short of that, we will be, I presume, trying to beg, borrow, and steal money to continue the program. But right now, we do not have secured funding beyond 2023 for that.
Okay, Mr. Eric Matlock is asking, how will the SacRT Go service get better?
It's a bit of a, I don't know that we can field that question tonight definitively.
Yeah, the SRTP does talk a little bit about ADA paratransit service. I don't know if it really gets into service improvements because that service is so dependent on, fixed route service, as far as how it operates. Yeah, if there's questions or concerns about reliability and the service running on time or late pickups or something like that. I think that's maybe more of a customer service issue or something that could be dealt with. Maybe perhaps, I don't know.
Sarah, with us getting close to time here, when is our next open house? And do you think we can respond to the remaining questions? Maybe, I don't know that we have emails for all the participants, but
Taking notes, and we are going to work on a Q&A document so we can answer these questions and add them to the website.
perfect. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, so yeah, we are about out of time. So the next event, the next open house, which will be the same presentation, another Q&A open discussion period, will be next Wednesday, the 17th at 2 p.m. So it will be an afternoon session. The Zoom invitation link will be posted on the website. It might already be on the website right now. So that information is available. And did we want to just answer the rest of these questions after the fact? Do we want to do them now?
I think we probably should wrap things up, but
Okay.
how do folks get in touch directly with you, Sarah?
Oh, let's see. I have the last slide here. My contact information. Oops, I think I just, there we go. Can everybody see that? My contact information, phone number and email. You can contact me by phone at 556-0518. My email is spoe@sacrt.com. And you can reach me phone or email anytime. If there's questions or you want to speak to me, have comments or concerns, questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm available. Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, we really appreciate the
Yes.
good turnout, and we are here at your disposal to answer your questions. We do need to wrap for the night, but I'm going to generously volunteer up Sarah's email address. If you have any follow-up questions that you'd prefer to just do by email, I'll put that in the chat actually. And yeah, any other closing thoughts, Sarah? I would just, again, thank everyone for the good questions. And
yeah, closing thoughts, just, I know that there's a few lingering questions here, but I just would encourage everybody to just contact me, and we can keep the questions going if you have some anything outstanding, and feel free to join next week. There's another session. Oh, and the recording also, for those folks that wanted to access the recording, I think it will be on the website as well.
Correct. Yeah, we'll get that added. Hopefully we'll be able to add that tomorrow.
Okay. So are we ready to wrap up? All righty. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.